Hello and welcome to the Hero Spouse. I'm Kendra Ruth, here to answer one of your questions about marriage and midlife crisis. Today we have April. April has a bomb drop of May 27th, 2025, and a date of marriage of 2017. She has a Boomerang who is a high energy replayer. She says, I'm just wondering if or how the death of someone close in our family would affect him. She says, I'm also not sure if he's a Boomerang or a Vanisher. Bomb drop day, he left and never came back except to do things around the house so that we can sell it. He reached out quite a bit at first, but now it's only for practical purposes, maybe every 2 weeks. He went to a lawyer and he paid the retainer recently. I'm just curious if a death in the family would make him spiral more. I don't believe I'm standing anymore. I'm ready to be done. I'm just curious how the death would play out. I'm expecting it in the next year. Thank you. So first, bomb drop versus Vanisher versus close contactor, no contactor. So he is a Boomerang, just like you said. I mean, bomb drop versus close Boomerang versus Vanisher. He is a Boomerang, as you've said. But I think what you're really thinking about is clinging. Is he a clinging? And no, you're right, he's not that. What we get confused on is Boomerang and Vanisher and off and on. So off and on and Vanisher are distant. Boomerang is a close contactor. But when I put the clinging modifier on it, that is a very specific type. Clinging is when they are an emotional connection. And so that is different. Really, it's Boomerang, and clinging is just a type of Boomerang. Okay. So the Boomerang, off and on, and Vanisher are really, they're just math. It's just about how frequently they contact, not about the emotional connection within the contact. So it doesn't matter what kind of connection he's showing, why he's connecting to you, or not connecting, but why he is contacting you. He's contacting you because he needs to see the kids. He's contacting you because you have taxes. He's contacting you because it is some form of business. He wanted to get a coffee mug. He wanted to get stuff from the house. Practical purposes every 2 weeks. It's not a connection, in other words, is what you're pointing out. He's not contacting you because of this emotional need, because he's missing you. He's not reaching out. And that's where the confusion comes in, isn't it? And that means that once everything is done, maybe he'll vanish. And yeah, that could be. When you no longer have business together, especially if you don't have kids and you haven't said, then maybe you won't have as much need to contact each other. If you have kids, you will always be in each other's lives. You will need to co-parent or parallel parent somewhat. But even then, you can do that from a distance if it's parallel parenting. My parents, once I was an adult, hardly ever saw each other. They talked on the phone occasionally when it was necessary for me. And I don't mean because I needed it, but when they were talking about me. It might not have been something that I was aware of, but when they needed to talk because something was going on with me. So they would talk. They had access to each other, but they weren't friends. They weren't in each other's community, and they were far apart geographically. So they didn't need to be talking to each other other than about me. And I'm an only child, so I'm the only one they needed to co-parent about, and they were great at that when I was a kid. So I think disappearing is something, and I want you to know, those of you who have boomerangs, who don't have clinging boomerangs, and you're thinking, well, the only reason that they are a boomerang, that they have this kind of contact, is because of the kids, or is because of business things, or because, well, we just live near each other, or we work in the same office building, or we just happen to be near each other and see each other, is we're around each other, but it's not because they have any need or desire to see me. Well, maybe as you get further and further apart year-wise, as time grows, you will have more reason for them to become more of a vanisher, or you to become, because you will have less need for that. You will grow, you will detach. And those of you who are closer to bomb drop might not feel that at this point. And for some of you, that's not going to happen. For some of you, you will always feel that and have that missing. And I don't mean sitting by the phone, feeling it in your stomach pit, terrible. But you'll always, like, that was my person, and I wish this hadn't happened. And there'll be the sigh and the sadness. But for some of you, it will just be, yep, that is my past. I don't have a need for them anymore, and I don't think about them. They don't think about me. But it will get better with time, or increase with time. And it's not that they are a vanisher then, because midlife crisis, they're a vanisher. It's that you do grow apart then. It's just life changes as you have changed your lives because of this thing that has happened. And you need to move forward with your life. And your life track is moving away from theirs because of what's happened. So that isn't meaning that they are a vanisher type or any type in that sense. It's just what's happened with your life after this stuff. But through this stuff, Boomerang, Vanisher, off and on, those are just reflections of the amount of contact they have. If it is every day or every week or every couple of weeks, that's a boomerang. If it is every other month, you're at an off and on. Every 6 months, twice a year, every 5 years, you're at a vanisher. If you never see them, vanisher. But if it's 5 years out and you had regular contact for a while and you just didn't, and now you don't at all, but it just kind of petered out, that doesn't mean that it became a boomerang to an off and on to a vanisher. It might just mean this life changed. And you don't have to always say, well, my MLCer. Sometimes they're not an MLCer anymore. Sometimes you're just, that's my former spouse. And we can grow to that place where we don't need to put it in this crisis tunnel anymore. Right now, however, and especially for you, April, we're not there yet. Because April, your bomb drop was only a few months ago. So when you're this early in, especially, yeah, we're there, you have a boomerang. And as long as there is some reason for him to be contacting you, and that does not mean that there is a need reason. Sometimes a boomerang has need reason that is a connection, and there is an emotional connection in there. And they are doing it for subconscious emotional connection that they don't realize, or they are doing it for something they do realize, but they don't want to admit it. Or it's simply taxes. Or they simply need to contact you for the kids. Or it really could be for those business kind of reasons. Practical purposes, as you said. Any of those. But it's still frequency of contact. Why do we say boomerang then? Because it gives you the opportunity. They can still see your changes if they have contact. They can't see your changes and they don't know what kind of person you are becoming. And you're not able to reflect back to them, be that mirror without the contact also. Because we might say we can't change other people, but other people can be changed through our influence. We are able to influence people. And then they can choose to change. from what they see in us, from what they learn from us, from the example that we set. And so we can be a mirror. But if they don't get to see what we're reflecting, then there's nothing, right? And so the Vanisher gets nothing. Maybe they hear from the grapevine, so they get tidbits, but very few tidbits on a Vanisher. A few more on the off and on. But the Boomerang, they're getting stuff. And that's why it's a boomerang. That's why it matters. Okay? So now, your bigger piece is, what about the death of someone? If someone close in the family or even a family friend dies and you know that you're expecting it, it's coming. And the crisis has already started, so this was not the trigger. Will that, what, not, of course, death affects people, but what effect will this have on someone in crisis? Now, there's a similar question that comes out. The similar question that I get is, will a crisis, if a crisis has put them into this, a trigger, has something put them into MLC, can a trauma or crisis bring them out? And the answer is yes and no. And what it is where are they in their crisis? So how a death will affect them in their crisis is dependent upon where they are in their crisis. If they are 7 years in, and remember, midlife crisis is 3 to upwards of 7. And when I say 3, I do not mean that it will end at 3 years. And I know people are going to go out and go, good, 3 years. It says 3 to 7. And I know there's the upwards, but they, going to erase that little upwards there and say 3 to 7. Okay, I'm giving it 3 years here. Or a lot of people will say, I'm giving it 2 or 18 months, especially the male standers. And that's it. Listen to that piece. But the thing is, that is the rare few. Sure, 3 years can be, but it's still short. I'm going to go with 5 to 7 as the more norm, but you can go upwards. Outliers are in the 3, but it still happens. Outliers are the above 7, but it still happens while we have upwards. Okay? So I'm going to say, let's say you're at 7 years. Okay? And dad dies. And it's been coming on for about 1.5 years because of cancer or something. So you've been knowing it, but dad dies. 7 years. And you've gone through some liminality and little bits. And MLCer has probably been sitting at the door of acceptance, that reintegration piece where they've maybe been back and forth a little bit for a long time. And a death or some kind of trauma can shove them right out into the real world because they've been ready. They just haven't done it yet, but they've been ready. They've just been maybe scared to go out there. They've been holding on. And now they are going to go out and reintegrate back into the world. They've been trying to reintegrate and then fail and go back and re-edit themselves. Fail, re-edit, try again. But they're ready. They've been sitting out there. I picture these people that are sitting, looking out at the real world, going, I'm scared. And now they're out there. But what about those who went into the crisis 3 months ago and then dad dies? And let's say instead of it having been preparing for it, let's say it was sudden. They just went in crisis. They are in crazy mode. This is the time when it's mixed messages. They are in the highs of limerence with their new alienator. Why would that kick them straight out into, hey, I'm okay mode? Because think about what midlife crisis is. Midlife crisis comes from trauma in childhood where you have some arrested development. You have gaps in your development that were incomplete. Pieces of development were incomplete. And somebody dies doesn't just suddenly complete those gaps from childhood. and then you can exit on and reintegrate into society. It doesn't solve the death of this person, doesn't solve the problem. I know. How does a crisis where they're avoiding everything solve the problem also? But that's going to come through their liminality and all of these attempts at reintegration into society and going back to liminality, figuring out their shadow self. And there's a lot of back and forth in that phase. But right now, they're 3 months in, and they're on the highs of their avoidance. There isn't a crisis that is going to kick them back into, hey, I'm okay, and I have good coping skills, and I have insight, and I can say that this was all my fault, and I'm so sorry to you, my wife. Now, that can happen for a while. There are some, it'll appear that way. And by a while, 3 months, 10 years, but they will have another crisis. There are some that get yanked out the front, is what I can say. I say they're yanked out the front of the tunnel. And it seems like they're fine. But they did not figure out the developmental gaps. And if they didn't do it then, they've got to do it sometime, unless they die prematurely. So it is going to come back to haunt them. And it will likely come back to haunt them for a worse crisis, because by the time they get to it in the future, they will have even more baggage behind them that needs to be integrated in. So it's going to be an even worse midlife crisis. And that's, I know you don't want it now, but you don't want it then either. It's going to be even worse. And so the death of a person, how it affects them, it does depend on the person. Depends on the dynamics of what the person was to them in their life. But a big thing is where they are in their crisis and what their crisis is about. So what that person was to them. What are the dynamics? So was this their estranged parent who they said, I am never going to be like that? And that is the parent they are now becoming. I will never do what my dad did. He left my mom at 48. Yeah, it's exactly what they're doing. They're doing everything their dad did right now. And that's the person who then dies. What might that do? That's often the trigger, but maybe what might that do? Sometimes in midlife crisis, when that's not the person who died, they become best friends with that person that they've been estranged from. Now what when that person dies? Maybe they just got somebody back into their life. Now what? They have a lot of gaps because they're becoming this person who they never wanted to be. So it does depend on what that person had been to them. Was this the person they wanted to be like or didn't want to be like? Was this the person they're becoming, but the one that they'd always tried to avoid? What were their issues? Or was this somebody who was their one person, the one person who believed in them? That mentor, you said, we're always hear that a kid needs just at least one person, one mentor, one person that can pull them through from the ghetto, out of gangs, but one person, one great and wonderful teacher that believes in them, and that kid can rise above it. And is it that one person that dies? Well, what happens? Do they falter? Do they have a complete breakdown? Not just falter. It depends on where they are in the crisis. It really does. Because if he is at a very fragile point, and fragile points are different. Fragile point of escape and avoid. Fragile point of in liminality. So those are two different kinds of fragility. Escape and avoid is, I'm too afraid to go to liminality. Now, liminality, they are no longer afraid, or they are afraid of it, but they are facing the fear. Oh, the shame of what they are and who they are, and they're going through all of these fears of who they are, and then that person dies. Liminality, when we're looking at them, they're just depressed to us. It's depression, depression, depression. Even when it's not, and a person is in a, I'll say, controlled liminality because they understand it. That might not be a midlife crisis. Maybe that would be a transition. But even then, it might look depressive to the outer world when someone is going inward in a controlled manner to be mindful. And so it looks so depressive. And if they have that person die, at what point? Maybe it's a point of strength. Maybe they will be able to turn it depending on their attitude towards it and what they do with the memory of that person. So I can't say how it affects a person because it is going to affect each person differently and how they spin that. Okay? I can tell you that it will have an effect, though. Unless that person has built so many walls and put so much denial and truly is able to compartmentalize and just put a wall around themselves, it will have an effect that they will not allow to show if they were just cemented their emotions in. And then there's such an avoidant. What is behind the heart of stone of the avoidant? Can we crack that? Can the midlife crisis crack that? Don't know. So that one we can't say. Okay. It's something to think about. And you will have your answer on how it will affect yours, April. It looks like within the next year. Okay. And then you can tell all of us for the data on how it affects him. And it will be interesting because it'll just be one piece of data. But we'll have some information. Okay. And then I hope that's helpful. And I hope this has been helpful for food for thought for all of you.